Marcus Chen had always been the type of man who believed his wealth entitled him to certain privileges. On that sweltering Tuesday afternoon in downtown Manhattan, he was running late for a meeting that could potentially add another zero to his already impressive net worth. The sidewalk was crowded, tourists mingling with business professionals, everyone moving in their own rhythmic chaos. An elderly man, perhaps in his 70s, moved slowly ahead of Marcus, his cane tapping against the concrete with each careful step. The old man wore a threadbare coat despite the heat, and his shoes were scuffed and worn. Marcus felt his irritation rising like bile in his throat. He had no time for this, no patience for people who couldn't keep pace with the city's demanding tempo. "Excuse me," Marcus said sharply, but the old man didn't seem to hear him, continuing his slow, deliberate progress down the sidewalk. Marcus's jaw clenched. He tried to step around, but the crowd surged, blocking his path. His phone buzzed with another urgent message from his assistant. The deal was waiting. Time was money, and this old fool was costing him both. Without thinking, driven by entitlement and rage, Marcus reached out and shoved the elderly man's shoulder. "Move it, old-timer," he barked. When the man stumbled but didn't fall, merely turning with confused, watery eyes, something in Marcus snapped. His hand flew out in a sharp, open-palmed slap that cracked against the old man's weathered cheek. The sound seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet street. Pedestrians froze, their phones immediately rising to capture the moment. The old man's hand went to his reddening face, tears forming in his eyes, not from pain, but from the sheer humiliation of being struck in public. Marcus felt a momentary flicker of regret, but his pride quickly smothered it. He was about to walk away when he heard it, the sound of expensive heels clicking purposefully toward him, and above, the unmistakable whir of helicopter blades. A sleek private jet was visible on the nearby helipad, its stairs extending like a mechanical tongue. From the aircraft emerged a woman in an impeccable designer suit, her presence commanding immediate attention. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the fury blazing in her eyes that looked strangely familiar, sharing the same shape and color as the old man now trembling on the sidewalk. Isabella Montgomery moved through the crowd like a force of nature, parting the sea of onlookers with nothing but her presence and the two security personnel who materialized at her sides. Her Louboutin heels clicked against the pavement in a rhythm that spoke of power, wealth, and barely contained rage. She had been circling for landing clearance when her father's emergency alert had triggered on her phone, a panic button she'd installed on his device after he'd stubbornly refused to stop taking his daily walks alone. Marcus watched her approach, with growing unease. Something about the way she moved, the cut of her obviously bespoke suit, the diamond studs in her ears that probably cost more than his car, it all screamed old money, real money, the kind that didn't need to prove itself. As she drew closer, he could see her features more clearly. High cheekbones, piercing green eyes, and an expression that could freeze hell itself. "Papa," Isabella said softly, reaching the old man and gently taking his arm. Her voice was tender when she addressed him, speaking in what Marcus now recognized as Russian. The old man, who moments ago had seemed so frail and helpless, straightened slightly at his daughter's touch, though his cheek still bore the red mark of Marcus's hand. Then Isabella turned to face Marcus, and her expression transformed into something terrifying. "You put your hands on my father," she said, her accent barely detectable beneath her perfect English. It wasn't a question. Behind her, one of the security guards was already on his phone, and Marcus noticed with growing alarm that the crowd had grown, phones pointed at him from every angle. "Look, this is just a misunderstanding," Marcus began, his confident veneer cracking. "The old man was in my way, and I was late for an important meeting." "The old man," Isabella interrupted, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is Dimitri Montgomery. Perhaps you've heard the name? Montgomery Industries? Montgomery Global Shipping? The Montgomery Foundation?" Each name landed like a punch. Marcus felt the blood draining from his face. Of course he'd heard those names. Everyone in business had. Montgomery Industries was a multinational conglomerate with interests in everything from technology to real estate. They had government contracts, owned media companies, and had more lawyers than most firms had employees. I didn't know, Marcus stammered, but even as he said it, he realized how pathetic it sounded. Isabella's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. You didn't know, so that makes it acceptable? Tell me, Mr. Chin. Yes, I already know who you are. Do you make it a habit of assaulting elderly people on the street when they inconvenience you? The crowd had swelled to over 50 people now, creating a human amphitheater around the confrontation. Marcus could see his reflection in the windows of the nearby buildings, captured from a dozen angles by phones and cameras. His face looked pale, his expensive suit suddenly seeming cheap and ill-fitting. The realization of what he'd done, and more importantly, who he'd done it to, crashed over him like a tidal wave. Isabella helped her father to a nearby bench, speaking to him in soft Russian, checking his face with the gentleness of someone who truly loved their parent. Marcus noticed how the old man, Dmitri Montgomery, he corrected himself, kept trying to wave away her concern. But she persisted. One of the security guards produced a first aid kit, and Isabella carefully applied a cold compress to her father's reddening cheek. My father, Isabella said, standing and turning back to Marcus, immigrated to this country with nothing but the clothes on his back 53 years ago. He worked 3 jobs to put himself through night school. He built his first business from a $1,000 loan. He taught me that wealth is a responsibility, not a license for cruelty. She took a step closer, and Marcus instinctively backed up. Every morning, he walks this same route. Do you know why? Because he says it keeps him humble. It reminds him of where he came from, of the streets he used to sleep on before he made his fortune. Marcus tried to speak, but his throat had gone dry. His phone was buzzing incessantly in his pocket, probably his assistant, wondering where he was. The meeting that had seemed so important 20 minutes ago now felt utterly insignificant. His business deal, which he'd been so desperate to close, was already crumbling. He could see it in Isabella's eyes. She was going to destroy him, and she had every means to do so. I'm sorry, Marcus finally managed, the words feeling inadequate even as they left his lips. I truly am. I was angry, stressed, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it. There's no excuse for what I did. You're right, Isabella agreed coldly. There is no excuse. But I'm curious about something, Mr. Chen. If my father had been wearing an expensive suit, if he'd been obviously wealthy, would you have struck him? Or do you only assault people you perceive as being beneath you? The question hung in the air, and Marcus found he couldn't answer it honestly. The truth was written on his face. He wouldn't have dared touch someone who looked important or wealthy. Isabella nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. Within an hour, the video had gone viral. Marcus Chen's name was trending on every social media platform, and not in the way he'd always dreamed of when he imagined his rise to prominence. The hashtag privileged bully was attached to his face, his company, his entire identity. News outlets were already reaching out for comments, business partners were calling his office with concerns, and his lawyer had left 3 increasingly urgent voicemails. Isabella had taken her father back to the jet, but not before ensuring that multiple witness statements had been collected and that the police had been called. She'd also made one phone call, brief, efficient, devastating. By the time Marcus returned to his office, he discovered that the deal he'd been rushing to finalize had fallen through. The investors, it seemed, didn't want to be associated with someone who was being called the man who slaps grandpas across the internet. His assistant, Jennifer, met him at the elevator with a tablet full of news alerts. Sir, it's everywhere. CNN, Fox, MSNBC. They're all covering it. The video has been viewed over 5 million times in the last hour alone. She looked genuinely frightened, as if she expected him to lash out at her too. Perhaps that said more about his character than he'd like to admit. Marcus watched the video on his office computer, seeing himself through the world's eyes. He looked like a monster, wealthy, entitled, cruel. The sound of his hand connecting with Dimitri's face made him flinch. How had he become this person? when had his ambition curdled into something so toxic that he thought it acceptable to physically assault an elderly stranger on the street. His phone rang. It was his mother. Marcus almost didn't answer, but he knew she'd keep calling until he did. Marcus. Her voice was thick with tears and disappointment. How could you? That poor man. And to find out he's Dimitri Montgomery, do you know what you've done? Not just to your career, but to our family's name? Mom, Your grandmother called me crying. She saw it on the news. Her friends are all talking about it. She's humiliated. We're all humiliated. She paused, and he could hear her trying to compose herself. But that poor man you hit, he's someone's father, someone's grandfather. What you did was unforgivable. Marcus ended the call and sat in his leather chair, the Manhattan skyline stretching out before him through floor-to-ceiling windows. From up here, people looked like ants scurrying about their insignificant lives. He'd always liked this view, liked feeling above it all. Now he realized how that perspective had poisoned him. Isabella Montgomery didn't believe in half measures. After ensuring her father was comfortable in their penthouse suite at the plaza, being tended to by their private physician, she made her way to her office in the Montgomery building, a gleaming tower that bore her family's name in letters that could be seen from blocks away. Her assistant had prepared everything she'd requested during the helicopter ride back. Pull up everything we have on Marcus Chen, she instructed her legal team, assembled in her conference room. 7 of the best lawyers money could buy looked back at her, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and concern. They knew that look on their boss's face. It meant someone was about to learn a very expensive lesson. Chun Capital Management, her chief legal counsel began, pulling up a presentation on the massive screen. Founded 8 years ago by Marcus Chen after leaving Goldman Sachs. Current assets under management, approximately $800 million. Notable investors include the Rothschild Family Office, the Kwan Family Trust, and several Silicon Valley executives. He clicked to the next slide. They've recently been in negotiations to acquire a controlling stake in tech-forward industries, valued at $1.2 billion. Isabella leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. And Montgomery Industries has what relationship with tech-forward? We own 17%, another lawyer responded. Not enough for a controlling interest, but significant enough to have board representation and voting rights on major decisions. A smile played at Isabella's lips. Interesting. What else? The presentation continued. Chun Capital rented office space in a building owned by a Montgomery subsidiary. Marcus Chen's personal mortgage was through Montgomery Financial Services. His country club membership was at a club where the Montgomery Foundation was the largest donor. The web of connections was extensive. Marcus Chen's entire life, it seemed, was intertwined with the Montgomery Empire in ways he'd never even realized. I want every contract reviewed, Isabella said quietly. Every agreement, every loan, every business relationship. If Marcus Chen or his companies have violated any terms, I want to know. If they've skirted any regulations, I want evidence. And I want this done thoroughly but quietly. We don't need to announce our intentions. Isabella, her general counsel said carefully, I understand your anger, and what he did was reprehensible, but we need to be careful. This could be seen as vindictive, perhaps even as abuse of power. We have to consider the optics. She turned to face him, her green eyes flashing. The optics? My 73-year-old father was assaulted on a public street by a man who thought his time and his business were more important than basic human decency. That man showed no remorse until he realized who he'd struck. What message does it send if we do nothing? The next 48 hours were a nightmare that Marcus couldn't wake from. His company's clients began requesting meetings to reassess their relationships. Major investors wanted to discuss concerns about leadership and company culture. The press camped outside his office building, shouting questions whenever anyone entered or exited. His social media accounts were flooded with threats and condemnations. Someone had even started a petition demanding he be banned from doing business in New York. His wife, Catherine, had taken their 2 children to her mother's house in Connecticut. I need time to think, she'd said over the phone, her voice hollow. The kids are getting bullied at school. Madison came home crying because her friends' parents won't let them play with her anymore. They're calling you a monster, Marcus. And I watched that video. I don't know who that man is. Marcus sat alone in their Tribeca penthouse, drinking scotch and scrolling through the endless commentary about his character, his upbringing, his values. Investigative journalists had dug into his past, finding his college fraternity's hazing scandals, his first job where he'd been reprimanded for aggressive behavior toward support staff, his reputation as a demanding boss who went through assistants like tissues. The pattern was damning. He'd always thought of himself as driven, successful, someone who demanded excellence. The world was now showing him what he really was. A bully. His lawyer called with worse news. The district attorney is considering pressing charges. Assault of a senior citizen. It's a felony in New York. With video evidence and multiple witnesses, they have an airtight case. You could be looking at jail time. Jail? Marcus laughed bitterly. For a slap? For assault, Marcus. And given the victim's age and the premeditated nature, you can be seen on video deliberately approaching him. The DA thinks they can make it stick. Plus, there's pressure from the Montgomery family. They haven't filed a civil suit yet, but their lawyers have been in contact with the DA's office. Marcus ended the call and poured another drink. His empire, built over years of tireless work, was crumbling. And all because of one moment of anger, one loss of control. But even as he thought this, he knew it wasn't true. This wasn't about one moment. This was about years of believing himself superior, of treating people as obstacles rather than humans, of measuring worth in dollar signs. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Chun, this is Isabella Montgomery. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Montgomery Building, 47th floor. Come alone. It wasn't a request. The Montgomery Building's lobby was all marble and glass, with a massive portrait of Dimitri Montgomery from his younger days hanging prominently on one wall. Security guards vetted Marcus carefully before allowing him access to the private elevator that serviced only the executive floors. As the elevator climbed, Marcus caught his reflection in the polished doors. He looked haggard, older than his 42 years. He hadn't slept in days. The 47th floor was impeccably decorated, modern art on the walls, each piece probably worth more than his car. Isabella's assistant, a professional-looking woman in her 50s, greeted him with cool politeness and led him to a conference room with panoramic views of the city. Isabella was already there, standing at the windows with her back to him. Sit, she said without turning around. Marcus sat, feeling like a child called to the principal's office. When Isabella finally turned to face him, he was struck again by her composure. She looked rested, powerful, completely in control. She took the seat across from him, and for a long moment, they simply regarded each other. Do you know what my father said to me last night? Isabella asked finally. He asked me not to pursue this. He said everyone deserves a chance at redemption, that anger and revenge wouldn't heal anyone. She paused, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. My father is a better person than I am. Marcus didn't know what to say, so he remained silent. But I'm not ready to let this go, Isabella continued. Not yet. Because I've spent the last 2 days learning about you, Mr. Chen, and what I've found disturbs me. This isn't an isolated incident, is it? This is a pattern. You treat people as means to an end. You bulldoze over anyone who inconveniences you. Your assistants last an average of 7 months. You've been sued twice for hostile workplace practices. Your college roommate wrote a blog post about how you cheated your way through economics by paying grad students to do your work. Each revelation landed like a physical blow. Marcus felt his carefully constructed self-image shattering. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. I want you to understand something. Isabella leaned forward. The only reason you're not already completely destroyed is because my father asked me to show mercy. But mercy doesn't mean there are no consequences. It means the consequences should lead to growth rather than just punishment. Isabella slid a folder across the table toward Marcus. Inside were documents, contracts, agreements, proposals. He skimmed them, his confusion growing. I don't understand, he said finally. Chun Capital Management is finished, Isabella said bluntly. Your investors are leaving, your deals are dead, and your reputation is toxic. Within 6 months, you'll be bankrupt. But I'm offering you an alternative. She gestured to the documents. The Montgomery Foundation runs programs in underserved communities across the country. We need someone to oversee our financial literacy program, teaching money management, investment basics, and entrepreneurship to people who've never had access to that knowledge. Marcus looked up at her, stunned. You want me to work for you? After what I did? I want you to learn what my father learned when he came to this country with nothing, that true success isn't measured by how much you accumulate, but by how much you give back. The job pays $75,000 a year, a fraction of what you're used to. You'll travel to community centers, homeless shelters, rehabilitation programs. You'll teach people who've been where my father once was, people who society has dismissed just like you dismissed him. And if I refuse? Isabella's expression hardened. Then I stop holding back. I use every resource at my disposal to ensure you never work in finance again. I pursue criminal charges to their fullest extent. I file civil suits that will drain whatever assets you have left. I make you an example that will be taught in business schools as a cautionary tale. Your choice, Mr. Chun. Redemption or ruin. Marcus looked at the documents again. 3 years. That's what the contract specified. 3 years of his life dedicated to teaching others, of starting over at a salary that wouldn't even cover his current mortgage payment. He thought about his father, who'd worked as a janitor to put Marcus through school, who'd been so proud when his son became a successful businessman. What would his father think of him now? I'll do it, Marcus said quietly. But I need you to understand something. I am sorry. Truly. Not because of who your father is, but because of what I did. I've spent the last 2 days seeing myself clearly for the first time, and I don't like what I see. Isabella studied him for a long moment. Words are easy, Mr. Chun. Let's see if your actions match them. You start Monday. The first day of Marcus's new life began in a community center in the Bronx, a far cry from his corner office overlooking Central Park. The building was old, the paint peeling in places, but it was clean and filled with hope. Posters on the walls advertised GED programs, job training, addiction recovery support groups. Marcus felt like an alien who'd landed on a different planet. His class consisted of 12 people, ages ranging from 19 to 62. There was Maria, a single mother working 2 jobs who wanted to start a catering business. Jerome, recently released from prison, trying to rebuild his life. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lost her retirement in a predatory lending scheme and needed to start over at 60. Each person carried stories of struggle, resilience, and dreams deferred but not abandoned. Mr. Chun? Maria raised her hand during his first lesson on basic budgeting. No disrespect, but how do you budget when you don't have enough income to cover expenses? These spreadsheets are nice, but they don't work when you're choosing between rent and medicine. Marcus opened his mouth to give a textbook answer, then stopped. She was right. All his training, all his expertise, it was designed for people who already had wealth, who were trying to grow it rather than simply survive. I don't know, he admitted. Tell me about your situation. Help me understand. That honesty, that admission of his own limitations, broke something open. The class began to share their real stories, their actual struggles. Marcus listened, really listened, for perhaps the first time in years. He learned about payday loans with 400% interest rates, about landlords who exploited tenants, about the countless small injustices that kept people trapped in poverty. His education had never covered this. His privilege had blinded him to it. After class, Jerome approached him. You're that guy, aren't you? From the video. The one who hit the old man. Marcus tensed, waiting for judgment. Instead, Jerome nodded slowly. My therapist says everyone's fighting a battle we know nothing about. Maybe you were fighting something that day, but you're here now. That counts for something. Over the following weeks and months, Marcus began to change in ways he couldn't have anticipated. He sold his Tribeca penthouse and moved to a modest apartment in Queens. He learned to take the subway, to shop at discount stores, to cook his own meals. Catherine agreed to give their marriage another chance, but only if he proved he'd truly changed. His children visited on weekends, and he began teaching them about gratitude and empathy rather than achievement and success. 6 months into his tenure at the Montgomery Foundation, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. Dimitri Montgomery wanted to meet with him. Marcus arrived at the plaza, nervous and unsure, but was greeted warmly by the elder Montgomery in his suite. The old man's cheek had long since healed, leaving no visible mark. Sit, sit. Dimitri gestured to a chair, his accent thicker than his daughter's. Isabella tells me you're doing well. She also tells me you've been donating your entire salary back to the foundation to create scholarships. Why? Marcus had been dreading this question. Because I have a trust fund I'd forgotten about. And because I don't deserve to profit from my punishment. The work I'm doing, it's the most meaningful thing I've ever done. Teaching people who actually want to learn, who appreciate the knowledge because it could change their lives, it's shown me what I was missing. Dimitri nodded, pouring them both tea from a silver service. You know why I walk those streets every day? Not just to stay humble, but to remember. To see the people I could have been if luck had been different. My success, it was hard work, yes, but also opportunity, timing, the help of strangers who owed me nothing. He sipped his tea. You hit me because you saw an obstacle. Now you see people. That is growth. I don't expect forgiveness, Marcus said quietly. What I did was inexcusable. Forgiveness is not something you expect. It's something you receive as grace. Dimitri smiled. I forgave you the moment it happened. The question was always whether you could forgive yourself, whether you could change. Isabella's program, it was designed to answer that question. Marcus felt tears pricking his eyes. I've lost almost everything. My company, my reputation, most of my wealth. But I've gained something more valuable. I've gained perspective. I've gained purpose. Then you haven't lost anything that mattered, Dimitri said. Isabella wants to expand the program nationally. She wants you to oversee it. Better pay, more responsibility. But only if you want it. This isn't about punishment anymore. It's about whether you've found your calling. Marcus thought about Maria, who'd just opened her catering business with a microloan and he'd helped her secure. About Jerome, who'd gotten his contractor's license and was hiring other ex-convicts. About Mrs. Patterson, who was teaching her own financial literacy class now. He thought about his children, who were learning that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the positive impact you had on others' lives. I want it, Marcus said. Not because I've redeemed myself. I'm not sure you can ever fully redeem and act like that. But because I've finally found work that matters, work that helps people instead of just enriching myself. Dimitri extended his hand. Then welcome to the family business, Mr. Chin. We build people up. We always have. As Marcus shook the old man's hand, he understood that this was more than a second chance. It was a complete transformation. The man who'd slapped an elderly stranger on a Manhattan sidewalk was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood what his father had tried to teach him all along. That character isn't measured by what you do when everyone's watching, but by how you treat people you think don't matter. In the end, everyone matters. And that lesson, painful as it was to learn, had been worth everything it cost him.